Welcome to the Legal CFO.
Hey there, welcome to the show where clarity meets profitability. This is the Legal CFO with Ryan Kimler, the founder of NetProfit CFO. If you're a law firm owner looking to get a handle on your finances, grow your bottom line, and finally take control of your numbers, you are in the right place, because each episode, Ryan's going to break down the business side of law with straightforward strategies to help your firm run smarter, earn more, and scale with confidence. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist. As always, I am here with Ryan Kimler. Ryan, welcome back.
Yes, great to be here and excited for today's topics.
Yeah, payroll benchmarks. We're going to talk about whether people are spending too much or perhaps too little. Kind of an interesting topic here. I'm excited to get into this with you. Let's start here. What percentage of a law firm's revenue should typically go to payroll?
Yep, love to start there. Typically, I love to see 40 to 45%. Now, let me include some important details in that 40 to 45%.
Okay.
All right. So that should include our admin staff. I'm not just talking about, the billers of the firm, like paralegals and legal assistants and attorneys. I'm talking, this is firm wide. This should also include items like our healthcare, our 401k, workers' comp insurance. Most firms, I think, do go with that. Really, I say anything that's related to paying our people. If you have any additional like liability or disability insurance policies, anything like that should be in that payroll number. Additionally, this is probably the last piece, and this is really, really big, really, really critical. The owner should be on salary and in that number as well, at a number that is reasonable. Now, reasonable, let me run down two roads here. So the IRS says for tax purposes of S corps, you've got to pay yourself reasonably, right? And that's really so business owners don't cheat the Medicare system and Social Security, right? That is not the kind of reasonable that I'm talking about. I'm talking about more of a common sense, gut feeling, budgeting, more kind of reasonable. So if you have a law firm, for example, that's doing $1 million in revenue, let's just throw out that round, easy number. That means you're not on a salary of $500,000 a year. Okay. That just wouldn't be reasonable. And you're never going to get your payroll to 40 to 45% if you're paying yourself 50% already. Okay. At the same time, in a law firm that's $1 million, reasonable would not be $75,000 if you're the lead, really like partner, owner, attorney. All right. So it's a really gut feeling, reasonable, what do you need to really pay your bills, live a decent lifestyle, probably is in the six figures, 100K to 200K, something like that. Obviously, you're going to supplement that income in addition with distributions most of the time. Okay, but that 40 to 45% of revenue should include you as the owner and your entire team.
Okay. What if for a solo practice, for a one person kind of practice, do you recommend people still pay themselves a salary, or is it not really important?
Yeah, so it really depends on where they're at revenue wise and where if that really has benefit or not.
Okay.
I think if you're a solo and you're doing $400,000 a year, which as a solo, I think if you had, like a paralegal, you could probably get that done. If you're in that kind of a situation, you're doing enough revenue that it does make sense to pay yourself a salary. If you're a solo and you're at, 150, 200, probably more in their range where it doesn't make so much sense.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And how can a firm tell if they're out of balance as far as payroll goes? What kind of metrics can they look at?
Yeah. So I love starting with that 40 to 45%. If you are out of balance there, then I start looking at personnel. So obviously, from a, pricing and how you pay your people standpoint, you probably have maybe a senior attorney on staff that's really experienced. You're going to pay them more than you pay an associate. And so really looking at your team and saying, are we balanced among our senior attorneys and our associates and the partner attorneys that we have, basically between our more expensive billers and our less expensive billers? Because if you get too far out of balance on any one of those sides, if you get too many associates at the firm, you're probably not going to produce enough because a lot of their hours, especially if they're new out of school, needs to be written off. They spend time researching. They're not efficient. Versus if you're on the heavy partner side, right, you're going to be heavy on the payroll side, right? More experience, higher wages, especially if they're generating cases and you're paying them bonuses for doing that, right? So I really like to look at the team and what positions do we have filled and how many of each position do we have filled, right? And really look at the scales that way too.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's easy. That should be pretty easy for people to kind of take a look at their own numbers and figure out. In your experience when you work with firms, how does over or understaffing affect the profitability as well as the operation?
Yeah, so it's very, very hard to meet the exact demands of your staff, right? And where you're at, right? Obviously, if you've got a firm where you're not generating enough cases and you're overstaffed to a certain extent and your staff isn't really busy, right? Obviously, they're not going to bill the hours that you really need them to bill to get you a good return, right? And so if, you're paying them payroll hours and they're full time and they've got hours that they're sitting and they're not billing because they don't have enough cases to work, that's going to impact your profitability. You kind of have an opportunity gap there, right? Maybe you're currently producing $1 million in cases, but your team really has the capacity to bill 1.2, right? Things like that. Obviously, that gap of $200,000 you're missing out on. Now, you go the other way and your firm has the capability of producing, let's say 1.2, and you're generating 1.5, right? Then yes, you're going to be wildly profitable if they're keeping up with that workload. But you sacrifice other things: employee happiness, work culture, how long they stay, retention rate. And obviously, if you're kind of playing a churn and burn game and you're going through a lot of employees, it's going to get very expensive on the hiring side.
Yeah, and the training and
Yep.
because sometimes employees don't work out right away too, and that gets expensive.
That is very true. Yeah, and right now in the marketplace, unemployment's very low, and so most likely if you're going to get a good candidate, you're probably going to work with a recruiter to do it, and so you're paying recruiter fees, especially if it's a maybe if not if it's a entry level associate that's right out of school, but if you're looking for a more senior, more experienced attorney, you're probably working with a recruiter because more than likely they're already working somewhere else. And you're trying to give them a better offer, sell them on your firm. And so hiring and firing and training can get very expensive. And so finding that balance is really important too. But either way, if you're really, really far off, if you're on the extreme end of things, it's going to hurt your profitability for sure.
Yeah. And do you actually kind of sit down and guide firms through hiring decisions or compensation adjustments during their growth?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's super, super important to look at, and making sure, especially in the marketplace, right now where we're at, again, very low unemployment. I mean, you want to make sure your people are happy and that you're paying them well to keep them around. Because a lot of times, I think right now, paying someone an additional 5, 10K to really make them happy with their experience on salary is probably way cheaper than losing them and having to go get somebody else, right?
Especially in this world, in the law world.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, if you're in that position where you're looking to make that next hire, I work through with firms all the time. What is I actually just did one yesterday. What is the total compensation package going to be, right? What are we going to spend in benefits? What are we going to spend in taxes, 401k? What is the total cost of that employee going to be? What's the total highest salary that we can offer them and still get, and expect a return that we expect, right? So we work through those kind of numbers all the time as firms look to go and hire. And I'm happy to help them with that process. It is super, super important and really, really affects your profitability. Probably more than any other expense is really your payroll.
Yeah, for sure. Your people. Yeah. I imagine a lot of firms start and maybe aren't quite sure exactly, how to staff, how much to staff, all that stuff as you're trying to build your business. Are there specific signs that it's time to restructure or perhaps streamline a legal team?
Yep. So definitely we always look at efficiency, and we want to make sure that everybody's efficient to start out with, right? And looking at, are they billing, a good number of hours, or if they're working flat rate cases, are they getting a good number of those completed? And then from there, we start to look at, how many hours of overtime is the firm working, if they're working overtime. And we start to look at, how much additional billable hours is somebody going over their requirement. So if their requirement is 130 hours in a month, let's say, and then all of a sudden they're doing 150 because they have to keep up with the work, and we've got, an additional 20 hours just on one employee, that adds up over a couple or three billers, right? Then we can start looking at, well, there's 60 hours. It's probably time to make that next hire, bring on additional cases, and fill their plate once they get here. But if you've got 50 or 60 hours of work that other attorneys are already billing over their regular requirements in their regular time, you probably have enough to get that next attorney started, because they are going to take some time to ramp up. And it does take time to kind of hand off cases or train on cases, right? It's not going to happen overnight. And so those are usually things and indicators and signs that, you should start to look at. If you're a solo, a coach that I work very closely with says once you get to 20 billable hours a week, you should look to start hiring that attorney.
Oh, wow.
So that you can free yourself up to go back out and market and keep getting cases. And then obviously once you bring them on, fill their plate.
20 seems low. That's an early. So basically he's saying that, or this coach is saying, start early, like plan for, hey, this is gonna keep changing pretty rapidly. I suppose that makes sense, because the last thing you want is to be just inundated with work and then trying to hire.
Yes, and the hiring process is going to take some time,
right?
Especially, again, depending on the market situation. But right now, it's especially going to take some time to get somebody in the door and get them started.
Yeah, get them up to speed and everything. Yeah. And so when you're kind of helping firms kind of figure everything out, is it difficult to balance, keeping your salaries competitive? Because as you said, there's not a lot of unemployment out there in this industry right now, but keep that operational sustainability?
Not if you're priced right.
Okay.
And so, pricing is one of the biggest levers that a law firm can pull, and being priced right, you should be getting a good return on the people that you have, right? You're taking the risk, you own the business. That should be your expectation. And if we're priced right and we're keeping that payroll in that 40 to 45% range, you should have strong profits, a strong profit margin while you're efficient, probably 20 to 30% profits roughly. And when you go out and make that next hire, you might drop off of that number a little bit, right? Because it does take money to hire and they're not going to be efficient right up front. But if you're strong before you start and make that hire, if you're in the 20 to 30% and you drop from there, it's not like you're going to be losing money.
Right.
You're just not profiting as much as you were when you were, super efficient, I'll call it.
Trying to keep payroll aligned with goals. I mean, that's especially with in that 40 to 45% range of payroll. I mean, it's a constant. You got to keep looking at it, right? You got to stay on top of it. Do you have a recommendation that you give to firms to either how often to revisit or how to keep everything aligned?
Yep. So I think, it really starts with building an annual plan first. And really, that should be done ideally towards the end of the year, probably October, November, of this year, for example, or October, November, December, and really look a year out and figure out, what are we going to commit to? How much do we want our team to grow by? How much do we want the business to grow by? And start bringing in those cases and start ramping that up. And even down to what month do we expect XYZ employee to start, right? Whether that be an attorney, a paralegal, whatever, and then really build that into your numbers. And so, with my clients, we're always meeting October, November, December, to look at their current numbers, but also to look at next year's. And, if we have an attorney that starts in May, let's say, and so we're going to have 7 months of that attorney's salary and benefits and all that added next year on top of what our payroll number was this year. And so I think that's the best way to get out in front of it, is really to plan forward, and really, at least a year out is great. So that you can start, again, bringing on those additional cases and, really plan for, this is what my payroll number is going to be next year, right? If it's 200K this year, maybe it's 300 or 325 or 350 next year. And you know what that number is. I mean, those numbers that I just gave are probably really low, but you know what it is. That's my point.
But isn't it tough to plan? Because you don't kind of know. Any service-based industry, it's different than if you make something. I mean, if you make a certain amount of widgets in a year, you know that hopefully, ideally, you're making enough that you can sell and all that. Obviously, there's other economic considerations, but with service-based stuff, you can just get inundated with cases. Or is it sort of like, this is the amount, the amount of cases we want to take, and we don't want to take more than that? Do you kind of have to have that outlook?
Yeah, I think so. You've got to make sure that the clients that you're bringing on are the right fit for you. Obviously, if you're inundated with a ton of leads, number one, that gives you the opportunity to raise your prices again, if you haven't recently, because that's going to narrow the pool of clients that really want to work with you. And number two, it also lets you be selective on who you're taking. Maybe depending on the service, maybe you ask for the full retainer for the case right up front, right? And the people that can't afford that, can't pay that, you don't do the work on if you're inundated with leads, right? Because if you can collect a full 100% deposit, you're not going to have to worry about collecting the money afterwards. You already have it all. And so I think from that standpoint, that's on the easier side to deal with, versus the other standpoint of not enough, right? Then maybe we're talking about, well, do we need to bring in some outside marketing help? And what does that look like? What is the strategy there, right? That can be harder to deal with, I think, of not having enough versus having too much.
Yeah, especially when it comes to payroll, because then, do you need to cut? Do you need to make changes? Are you overstaffed? Yeah, those are obviously some pretty big questions.
Yep. And hopefully not, right? And I think, a big non-financial data point that, law firms really need to track to really manage this is, how many cases are we closing a month with our current staff situation, right? And not only how many are we closing a month, but also by practice area. So if you do multiple practice areas, you probably have small teams that, work on those practice areas. Knowing how many you're closing lets you know how many you've got to open to keep them busy. And you can work the funnel backwards from there.
Yeah, that's smart for sure. All right. Well, thanks for listening to the Legal CFO with Ryan Kimler. If you're ready to get financial clarity from your law firm, visit NetProfitCFO.com. And of course, don't forget to like, follow, and leave us a review. Ryan, it's always great having you here. Thanks so much for all the tips.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.